Today on Pots and Trowels, I'm going to be answering some of your gardening questions, and that's brought to you with the support of Cobra Garden and Darlac. Hello and welcome to Pots and Trowels for our Christmas Q&A, and we've got loads of questions that you've sent in on Twitter, on Facebook and through YouTube, so I'm going to rattle through them. But before I do that, just a reminder that we also do our Pots and Trowels podcast, which goes out every Sunday morning,
which will open to a lovely pink.
I've tried to keep bits of my gardening life all set.
If you want to listen to that, there's about 40 minutes of chat with me, with Jill and Sean and a guest, so we'd love it if you'd listen to that as well. But we better get on with these questions, hadn't we? So the first one comes from Jean Coombs Henry, and she says, how were boxwoods propagated so easily back in the day to create all the hedges which encircled landscape gardens? Did the clippings root on their own or in compost heaps? Well, no, they would have rooted them very similar to how we do it these days. People have been taking cuttings for hundreds of years, and they would just take a lump off the box when they've been trimming it, or later in the season. Normally they would do this sort of as a semi-ripe cutting later in the season when they're slightly woody, trim them down to a cutting like that, and then they would have inserted them in either directly in the ground in a cold frame, or they would have put them in trays of a gritty soil in a cold frame and then allowed them to root over winter and then grown them out in a field for a year before transplanting them. So very similar to what we do now, but quite basic how they would have done it. Andrew from Saddleworth has been in touch. He says, hi Martin, I'm on the South Pennines about 1,330 feet above sea level, and I've got a heritage orchard around 150 feet long. Sounds really good. The width of the garden here is 24 feet and is a scraggy lawn, and I'm wondering whether I can plant some hazel here for coppicing and have a woodland feel to it, but would you advise to plant under the hazel and the fruit trees? I'm thinking rhododendrons, hydrangeas, maybe mulberries, but wondered if they would work in partnership. And I want to have a wandering path and a journey rather than seeing it all. Well, I think that's a good idea, Andrew. You don't want to see it all, so if you can meander through, you keep seeing new plants. And I think most of what you said would be actually fine up there and grow, but bear in mind that you're not going to have a lot of height probably between the canopy of the apple trees and your hazel. So I would go for fairly low growing. So I think you could probably get away with some of the hydrangeas, maybe things like Annabelle that you can cut down every year, maybe dwarf rhododendrons and azaleas. You could put sarcococca, that's a lovely evergreen, often called the winter box, and it has lovely white scented flowers and it's evergreen, so you could put that in. I would plant some bulbs below them and between them as well. Some ferns will like it because you'll get a bit of dapple shade from them. Hellebores will work, so you get that lovely spring colour, and you could even put some dogwoods in so you get that winter stem colour. So I think that way you'll get colour and evergreen all through the year. And the other thing you could do, because you're not far from Saddleworth Moor, you could probably get some bilberries, the low growing spreading very closely related to blueberries, and you get a tiny little bilberries on there in late summer and make bilberry pie. So I think you can make a really lovely journey up the garden path through your little orchard there. Catherine Mays has been in touch about a witch hazel, which was around 7 feet tall and 20 years old. It was in bud ready to flower, then it suddenly died. It was at the end of the garden with agricultural land on the other side of the fence. We have neutral to acid free draining soil. There's no evidence of why it died. Have you got any ideas? Well, it's difficult to say really. I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is if it's close to agricultural land, is there a possibility that it may have caught some spray drift? If the farmers have been spraying arable crops, I mean, they're normally as safe as they can, but it will carry on the wind. If other plants have died around it, that would probably be a telltale sign. But if everything else was okay, I suspect that wasn't the case. I suspect in that situation it might be a fungal disease. It could be something like Phytophthora, which is a root disease. We can often get it if we've had a wet period in the winter. It gets into the roots. It's a waterborne fungal disease, or it could also be honey fungus. So both of those fungal diseases will attack witch hazel, which is a shame. Don't give up, plant another one, prepare the ground, plant another one, and hopefully that one will last. Instead of 20 years, you'll get 30 years out of it. Martha Fudge has been in touch saying, hi Marty, I have a hardy hibiscus in a large pot. It must be 5 years old, but it didn't flower last year at all, and the previous year only had a few flowers. I fed it through the summer with a layer of topsoil each spring on the pot. What am I doing wrong? Hopefully you will have some ideas. And she lives in Connelly in South Wales, so thank you in anticipation. Well, the hardy hibiscus is hardy, so it's not the weather that's affecting it. It's deciduous, it will lose its leaves. They like a warm position and they like well-drained soil. So whether it's getting too much water where you are in Wales, and they like lots of potash. And I think probably because it's in a pot, then it needs a bit more feeding than it would be if it's got its roots out into the garden. So I think come spring, when it comes into leaf, you need to feed it. Do your top dressing with a bit of compost on top rather than soil, a bit of extra fertilizer, and use some, tomato feed. Tomato feed is great. Any type of tomato feed, get some tomato feed on there. That's high in potash, but it's also got, if I look at the nutrient level, it's also got some nitrogen, phosphate and the potash on there. And what that will do, it will promote healthy, strong growth, but the potash is what really makes the flower buds form. And I would use that when it's growing, some sort of May onwards, maybe on a weekly or fortnightly basis. When you water it, give it a drop of tomato feed, and hopefully that will encourage some more flowers for you next year. Laura Pringle has got a Brunnera Jack Frost, lovely plant, great for woodland. That would be one for you, Andrew, as well. You could put drifts of that between your hazel and your apples. It suffered a bit with the frost and then the big wind. So Laura wants to know if she should cut it back or leave it. She thought they were evergreen. Well, they're not truly evergreen. They're a herbaceous perennial, which means they die down. But if we get a mild winter, they will often retain a lot of their leaves. And this one isn't Jack Frost, but it's very, very similar. It's got the same leaf marking. Jack Frost is a low-growing plant, as you can see, and it gets the name because the leaves have got this mottling on that makes them look as if they've been frosted. And the one you've got has those lovely blue sprays of sort of forget-me-not blue flowers through the spring, and it's great in dapple shade running through a border. That one, by the way, is called Mrs. Morse. It's exactly the same, except it has white flowers instead of blue. Mine are looking a bit tatty as well. I leave them on. That's just weather damage, bit of slug damage on there, wind and rain, frost. And they will die down gradually over the winter. And then what I normally do about February time is get my secateurs or shears, give them a really good tidy up, cut them back to ground level, and then you'll get that flush of new growth in the spring followed by the flowers. So it's doing what it should do, and I wouldn't worry too much about it. Jim Leahy lives in Concord, Massachusetts. Hello over there. But everything you talk about applies in one way or another. So thank you for watching. Our question is about managing ajuga in our lawn. We have a section of our lawn that's been invaded by ajuga from the next door neighbour. It's an area under a linden tree, which we would call a lime tree in England, where the grass is naturally weaker. As the ajuga spreads, is it also likely to run over to the well-seeded thick lawn as well? Is there a way to stop it or eradicate it organically? Our lawn hasn't seen any chemicals since we moved here 40 years ago, and I have successfully managed dandelions and plantain by hand weeding, but I learned that simply trying to pull out the ajuga yielded no results, as all the rootlets left behind just regrow. What can I suggest? Well, it's not a problem I've ever come across before, to be honest, Jim. We get a plant in ours called Selfie, which looks a little bit like a small ajuga, got a similar flower structure, similar leaf, but much, much smaller indeed. And that can be a little bit of a problem in lawns. Really good for pollinators though, bees and pollinating insects. But of course, ajuga has got that much bigger, bolder leaf and it will grow much taller. I think you don't want to use a lawn weed killer. A lawn weed killer would work, but I can understand that you don't want to use that. So I think it is regular hand pulling. And I think what I would do is probably even water the area first so the ground's a bit soft, and then I think you'll be able to get more of those roots out and those little root sections will come out instead of snapping off. And I think you've just got to do that on a regular basis. Maybe then feed the lawn, try and thicken up the grass. You could even oversow it with a shade mixture if it's under the tree to try and get the grass really thicker, so it gives a little bit more competition to the ajuga. I don't think it's going to be a quick fix. I think you're going to have to keep on it for quite a long time, but I'm sure little and often you will start to weaken it and get the grass to come back a little bit. Lucy Martin says, I can't seem to grow primulas in pots or in the garden. They look beautiful when I buy them, but within days they are a sorry sight. Soggy, half-eaten leaves, and they never recover. I'm not sure what's eating them. I've put slug pellets down and around them and tried encircling them with grit, but nothing seems to help. Any ideas? Well, it could be slugs, Lucy. They love them. They'll eat the petals, they'll eat the leaves, and you'll get those telltale signs in their holes, very similar to the leaf on this one. They'll just nibble holes out all the way through it. So I suspect it may be. But it could also be the type of primula that you're planting in the garden. If you're buying them in the spring in the little 3.5-inch pots, what we call the florist ones, all these lovely bright colours and frilly ones, very often they aren't as robust as the older fashioned polyanthus type or the natural primrose. So it could be that that is part of the problem. So I think you've got to do a little bit of slug control, lots of different organic ways you can control them as well, and only plant them out when the weather's warming up, because they're not totally hardy, so a frost on them can cause damage as well. But don't give up. Try them in pots first, because they're often a little bit easier in pots. Rebecca O'Sullivan says, how can I stop cats eating my catmint? I've tried covering it, I put it in a pot and I keep moving it, I give up. Well, yeah, cats either love it or hate it. We've had catmint when we used to have a cat and they didn't bother it at all. But sometimes they will, they'll roll on it, they'll eat it, they'll completely flatten it. They're attracted by the scent of the leaf. So I think what I would do is you can buy some quite ornate cages, almost like a cloche covered in an attractive galvanised chicken wire that people use decoratively around the garden to protect seedlings and young plants. And I think when it's growing in the spring, when it starts to make that new growth, I would put one of these covers over it so it looks attractive. You don't want just a piece of scraggy old wire in the garden, and it will grow through that, but hopefully the cat won't be able to get to it until it gets to a reasonable size, and it might then just lose interest and forget about it and move on to other things. It might not work, but it's got to be worth a go. Next one is Christine Corduroy. Could you help with my young crabapple royalty? It leaves up in spring, and during the summer they all fall off and look like this. It's a lovely crabapple royalty. It's got that dark leaf, a lovely dark pink blossom, a very ornamental crabapple. What you've got is apple scab, I'm afraid. Even crabapples get apple scab. On the fruits you sometimes get little black spots, but on the leaf you get these dark blotches, which is typical what you've got with yours. Royalty isn't normally too badly affected by it, to be fair, so it's probably not going to be bad every year. What you need to do in the autumn, as soon as the leaves fall off, gather them up and get rid of them. Don't put them in the compost bin, put them in your dustbin, so you're not spreading the spores. Keep the tree fed and growing healthily, and even if they do drop off in the summer, you'll often get a flush of new leaves after that, so it won't weaken it too much. It looks worse than it is, but that's what it is, apple scab. Kate Harvey has got a lemon tree in a pot. She bought it 2 years ago from a supermarket, kept it outside over the summer, and it was doing well. She brought it inside, found some aphids which they've been sorted, but now all the leaves have fallen off and it doesn't look too happy. Still has lemons on it, which is good, and it's now been moved from downstairs into a bathroom where Kate thinks it looks a little bit better. Any suggestions, and should I prune it? Well, again, thank you for the photograph. I've had a look at the photograph. It's got more leaves on than I thought. It's lost quite a few and they look quite dry. So I think this is probably two things. I think it's probably been where it was upstairs, it's probably been a little bit too warm. They want frost protection, but they don't want to be too hot in the winter, because where they grow naturally, it's still cooler in the winter. So if you bring it into a very warm environment, the foliage will dry out and the roots will dry out really quickly, and then it will drop leaves. And the leaves on the top of the pot don't look diseased. I think they've just stressed and have dropped off. So the ones you've got on there, I think will stay on there. So make sure you keep it watered, not over wet, but just keep it moist, so fill the compost, and if it's dry, give it a drop of water or lift it to see the weight of it. And because it's going to carry on growing through the winter in your house, and I think a bathroom would be fine because it's got a bit of humidity in there as well, as long as it's got good light, then you could give it an occasional feed. And a good one, you could use the tomato feed, which I mentioned before, or something like seaweed. Now, the only problem with seaweed is it does have a slightly seaweedy smell. So just do it in the bathroom and open the window a little bit. But that's got all the sort of micro trace elements in there, because when I looked at the leaf, they looked a little bit mottled and yellow, which tells me it's lacking food. So I would give it a feed maybe once a month. Don't prune it now. Hopefully it will start to make some new leaf. I can see some flower buds on there as well. And I think come spring, it will start to leaf up, and then you could shorten some of the long growths or take some of the little twiggy bits out. But I think for now, we just got to keep it growing and get a bit of leaf back on it. But I think it's probably been too warm and too dry, which has probably caused it to happen. Alice McLean Duggan has said, hi Martin, I've a sweet pea seedling in a wee pot. I think you're from Scotland, aren't you? Right up there on the east coast, northeast coast, above Inverness, isn't it? It's growing but starting to turn yellow. Is there anything I can do to save it? And yes, you're from Ulness. Right. It's probably because it's stressed. I wouldn't leave it outside because you'll probably be quite cold where you're up there north of Scotland. So I think you need to keep it somewhere light and cool. It doesn't matter if it's cold even, as long as it doesn't freeze solid. So cool is good. And if it's going just that little bit yellow, it's probably just getting a little bit starved. You want to slow it down, if anything, because it's just going to grow too big over the winter if it's in the warmth. And again, just a little bit of dilute feed. And you could pinch the growing tip out. If it's getting tall and leggy, pinch the growing tip out, and that will cause it to bush out a little bit, and you'll get side shoots, so you'll get a stronger plant. So keep it moist, a little bit of feed, cool in a light place, pinch the tip out, and hopefully it will recover. Angela Giblin has got a question on pear pruning. And again, Angela, thank you for the photographs. Angela lives in Doncaster in Yorkshire. There are two pictures. One is a transplanted tree that's had no formative pruning. Looks like it's in a veg garden or an allotment. And the second picture is a pear tree in a large pot. So you want a bit of guidance. Well, they don't look too bad. They're not too congested. Ideal if there are any vertical branches directly in the centre, you could cut those back so you're creating more of a goblet shape. But pears sometimes naturally have a slightly weeping habit as well, so don't trim too much off. Shorten the longer ones. You've got some quite tall ones. They could be shortened down to where you've got some little side branches. So I wouldn't go mad. I would just do a little bit of thinning, shortening of some of those longer vigorous branches. Leave the slightly weepy ones because they will carry more fruit and blossom for you, and then you'll get new growth next spring, which will fill it out, and again next year you can do a little bit more. So they're not looking bad, so don't go too drastic with them. Just a light prune is all they need to get that sort of gobletty shape. And you also ask if I know of any courses in Yorkshire on basic fruit pruning. Unfortunately, I don't. If I hear of any, I'll put something on our Facebook page. You could try Harlow Carr maybe up at Harrogate, the RHS garden. They do courses, but whether they do fruit pruning, I don't know. And you say thank you, and you love pots and trowels, so thank you very much, Angela. And then finally, this is a question that came in on YouTube. You bought your geraniums inside in September, and you want to know, should you let them carry on flowering through the winter or snip the buds off to keep the plants short and stocky and to reserve the energy for next year? Well, I think if you bought them in September and they've carried on flowering, you've had really good value out of those. So what I would do now, probably let them flower for the next week, but once we get into January, I would then probably even trim the plant down a little bit, take any flower buds off, start to give it a little bit of feed. That will build it up, and then come the spring when the days are longer, it'll make much stronger growth, and then you'll get plenty of flowers next year. So I think giving it a little enforced break through January, February to rest and build it up will do it a power of good. And you've also asked me, this is following on from when we talked about houseplant care a couple of weeks ago, where you can buy a natural leaf shine for houseplants. If you just go onto the internet and do a search for natural houseplant leaf shine, there are 2 or 3 out there. They are made from plant oils and plant extracts. There's no palm oil in them, so they're all plant oils in there, and they leave a really clean sheen. And the benefit of the oil in them as well means if you've got aphids or mealybug on there or scale insect, it has a slightly detrimental effect to them. It will help to control them, so it keeps the leaf shiny and keeps them hopefully pest free. So there you go, we've answered all your questions. So all I've got to do now is to wish you all a very, very happy Christmas on behalf of the Pots and Trowels team. That's me, Jill behind the camera, who's got our mate moving around, and Sean that is in charge of everything technical. So have a wonderful Christmas and hope you'll join us on Pots and Trowels in 2024. Thank you for watching Pots and Trowels, and remember, all the videos we've done you can find on YouTube, where you can subscribe for free. We'll be back again next week, sowing onions in the greenhouse, so we'll see you then. Bye.